Hi, Guancho readers. Very nice to be in touch with you again. Well, I think the most important event is not a single event, it's the rise in disorder in the world. If you look at what is happening, you had in 2016, you began to have big events in the West. The election of Trump against the wishes of the American political establishment, the Brexit vote in Britain. Even earlier, we had 2011, 12, 13, the Arab Spring. This disorder has now got much worse. If we took, for example, the most dramatic development in this year is in Latin America. We have rioting in Chile. I mean, not small riots. I mean, I don't mean the type of Hong Kong riots is, a few thousand people and nobody is killed. But if you look at the riots in Chile, there's hundreds of thousands of people with many people killed. I mean, it's a distortion in the Western media to think that the biggest riots going on in the world are in Hong Kong. Actually, the riots in Hong Kong are tiny compared to the riots in Chile, riots in Colombia, riots in Ecuador, rioting also in Iraq. It's an increase in disorder. In fact, this is the most striking feature because it really is the perspective of what's going to happen. There are two views. One view is that the disorder will get less. The Western economies, which have been growing very slowly, and which is what is behind all this increase in disorder, will start to grow again fast, and then this disorder will disappear and we will have return to calm, centrist forces will be dominant. The second perspective is that the Western economies will continue to grow very slowly, and therefore this disorder will get worse because we've now had more than 10 years since the international financial crisis, and the Western economies have not really recovered. They're continuing to grow, so their growth is much slower than before the international financial crisis. It's the second perspective which is correct. The disorder is going to get worse because the Western economies will continue to grow slowly. So that is the increase in disorder is the main characterization I would give of 2019. Now, let's be clear. I don't think will be a big war or something, but there will be increase in disorder within an increase in number of countries. That's what will happen. Well, I think I would just repeat the words that I said, which is, I think, I'll put it more, it's the greatest social miracle in the history of humanity. And I mean that as a very serious and considered statement, not just as phrase. I mean, let's take times at which economies have grown very quickly. The first country in the history of the world ever to grow very quickly, with all the improvements in living standards that was created, was my country, with the Industrial Revolution. This grew, but this affected 2% of the world's population. When the United States began to grow very rapidly after the American Civil War, this affected 3.5% of the world's population. When the Soviet Union grew very rapidly after 1929, this affected 8% of the world's population. You can see why the Soviet Union had such a big impact, right, with that. But when China started to grow very rapidly, it was more than 20% of the world's population. And more than that, China was enormously less developed. It's an astonishing fact that China in 1949, according to the calculations, there were only 6 countries in the world by one calculation, or 8 countries in the world, country by another calculation, that had a lower per capita GDP than China. China was almost the poorest country in the whole world after 100 years of foreign intervention. Now, China is probably, by 2020 it will have, prosperity by Chinese standards, but I'll use an international criteria. I'll take the World Bank definition of a high-income economy. China, its present growth rate, will hit that in about 2022, maybe 2023. This is a complete miracle. To go from almost the poorest country in the world to be in a high-income economy within the lifetime of a single individual. This is just the greatest miracle in the history of the world. And this was achieved by the Chinese by the Communist Party of China, right? Why did it achieve it? I think firstly because of this very long period of struggle. Tens of millions of people in China died for the rejuvenation of China. If we go back to the whole century since, again, my country unfortunately creates a lot of problems in the world, and it created a problem in China. We started with the Opium War. In that 100 years between the Opium War and the creation of the People's Republic of China, probably 100 million people died in China. Right. This was a gigantic struggle, and this therefore produced a leadership that was capable of dealing with these types of problems. If you put it in theoretical terms, it's because, in my opinion, the Communist Party of China is the most faithful follower of Marx. The Soviet Communist Party deviated from Marx in very many ways. For example, if you take the Stalin so-called administered economy, which meant you eliminate, even the little local shop has to be owned by the state. There is no private sector. This is not what Marx wrote. Marx believed that there would be a prolonged period. The transition from capitalism to a developed socialist society would take a long period of time. On a world scale, it would take centuries. And therefore, the Soviet Party tried to jump over this, and it didn't work. So therefore, the Communist Party of China based itself on Marx, and it has the most Marxist interpretation. The phrase that the Communist Party of China unified Marxist ideas with the reality of China is not just a polite phrase. It's not, to be nice. It is the reality of the situation. Therefore, I knew this a long time ago. I started to read, I started reading Mao Zedong in the 1960s. And I read Deng Xiaoping. I read 1,000 pages of Deng Xiaoping in English, I'm afraid. Yes, and so I know this phrase because this is the most advanced political party in the world. If other parties had parties like the Communist Party of China, they would solve these problems which you're referring to. Not by carrying out exactly the same policies as the Communist Party of China, because each country is different. But they need the type of political leadership that they have. If you take in my own country, all this idiocy of Brexit, which can do great damage to the country, is the fact that the opposition to what is an attack by the United States, because Brexit is an attack by the United States on Britain, we don't have the type of leadership which you have in the Communist Party of China to fight it. If you take Latin America, I have many friends in Latin America, and I've been to Latin America several times. There are some very heroic individual people in China. Chavez, who I met several times, he would have given his life. I don't doubt it. Don't doubt for an instant for the future of his country. But they didn't have an organised communist party, which was capable of dealing with this problem, because it takes a great struggle to produce one. So, sometimes I think that particularly younger people in China don't realise just how lucky they were. They don't, because they didn't live through these enormous struggles that were necessary to create such a leadership. They don't understand how lucky they are. They have it easy. They think it's all, such things are created very easily, and they're not created very easily. They're created by huge social struggles. Well, Trump is under two contradictory pressures. On the one hand, yes, it's exactly as I wrote in the article, the US economy has slowed down. Trump was tactically skillful. He launched the trade war in early 2018 when the US economy was growing very fast, about 3.2%. Now it's slowed down to 2%, and it's still continuing to slow down. The economic situation is a negative for Trump. It creates problems for him for his re-election. His advantage is the Democratic candidates are not very good. For the reasons that they either want to continue Obama, but they have very bad candidates like Biden, for example, or Bloomberg, or they want to continue American military policy like Elizabeth Warren. The only person who the polls show who is really popular is Bernie Sanders, and the Democratic Party establishment is determined that Sanders will not be the Democratic Party candidate for president. That's what they're trying to do, because he says he's a socialist. Now, let's leave aside whether he is a socialist. I mean, he would be, by European standards, a rather moderate centre social democrat. He's not that. But nevertheless, he says he's a socialist, and the fact that tens of millions of people in America, because all polls show he's the most popular politician in America, the fact that tens of millions of people in America say that socialism is good, or a socialist is good, this is a very, very important historical turning point for the United States. This has not been the case for 100 years, that socialism was, or socialists were popular. But the Democratic Party is determined that he will not be the candidate. And therefore, their strongest candidate they're trying to stop. So therefore, the problem for Trump is that the economic situation is rather negative. I mean, he goes on all the time about how fast the economy is growing, but it's all nonsense. The economy is growing slower. His economic growth is slower than under Obama, George W. Bush, Clinton, anybody. It's really slow growth. But his advantage is that the Democratic Party candidates are, the Democratic Party is not very strong opponent to him. So he's got sort of two contradictory features. Well, I think that the key, you have got to understand what the form of the economic crisis. No economic crisis is ever exactly the same, right? You have many big crises in history, but none of them is exactly the same. Let's go back and look at the last really great crisis of the Western economies, 1929, the Great Depression. What was the feature then? The feature then was the economy went down very rapidly after 1929 and then went up very rapidly. Most people don't know, but by the 1940s, the world economy was growing, the Western economies were growing very fast. This crisis is quite different. In 2008, it went down. Didn't go down as far as in 1929, but the going up is very slow. If you take, we're now 11 years after the 2008 international financial crisis. If you take the 11 years after 1929, that is, go to 1940, the world economy, the Western economy, had grown more quickly by 11 years after 1929 than it had grown after 2008. So therefore, some people use the term the Great Recession. I think a much better term is the Great Stagnation. The great feature of the present crisis is how slowly the Western economies are growing, and therefore, as we said, the disorder this creates. This is due to absolutely fundamental structural reasons inside the United States. The US is actually producing very little capital. I could show you graphs about it, but it means the US is only adding about 3% of GDP a year to its capital stock, and therefore it's locked into very, very slow growth. The only way that the United States could grow quickly would be to do two things. It would have to completely reorganize the domestic US economy in the way that Roosevelt did with the New Deal, and even more was done during World War II. Most people don't know that the fastest growth ever in the history of US capitalism was during World War II. The World War II was not a crisis for the US economy. It was a crisis for US military, but for the US economy, it was the greatest period of its success in history. The US would have to reorganize its domestic economy, and it would have to reorganize internationally, because the purpose of World War II for the United States was it reorganized the international economic system. It got rid of the British Empire and its tariff protection. It made dollar. So you would have to have a simultaneous reorganization of the US economy and reorganization of the international economy. This is what Trump is trying to do, but he's failing in it. So therefore, at the present time, there's no way out for the US. That's why the very slow growth will continue. So therefore, the feature of this crisis is not the going down and the going up. The feature of this crisis is a very, very long period of slow growth, and therefore the gradual accumulation of crisis this creates. Well, yes, I know about this because I've been writing in Guangzhou. When Trump was elected in 2016, there was a type of controversy in Guangzhou in which there were two views put forward. One view was, oh, well, Trump is a business person. It'll be possible to do a deal with Trump. It's all very easy, right? I wrote other articles which said, on the contrary, for granted, saying that this was not the case, that Trump had brought anti-Chinese people into the absolute centre of his administration, and Trump would pursue a policy of confrontation with China. I believe the facts have shown that my view was correct, and that the other view was incorrect, right? Okay. I think that China must prepare for a prolonged period of aggression by the United States, not necessarily using the same tactics. There are some people in the United States who think that Trump's tactics are very stupid. They think the tariffs is a very bad idea because the American people are paying the tariffs. Why, if you're going to launch a war, don't fire the bullets at your own side, which is what's really happening. It says the tariffs have some effect on China, but the main people paying the tariffs are Americans. So there are quite a lot of people in America and in the American establishment who think that Trump's tactics are very, very stupid. And if Trump was defeated in the election in 2020, I think it's quite possible that the tariffs would be stopped. But I don't think that this will alter the basic policy of aggression by the United States. Other people want to attack China using different means. And the reason is very simple. America has an impossible dream. America is 5% of the world's population, but it wants to control everything important which goes on in the world. It wants to dictate what should be the policy of Iran, it wants to dictate what should be the policy of Latin America, it wants to dictate what is the policy of China, but it's not strong enough to do so. Firstly, it's 5% of the world's population, and secondly, its economy is becoming less and less part of the world population. It therefore has to try to maintain, as it cannot maintain its position by economic means anymore, it has to try to maintain it by military and political means, economic aggression. This is very dangerous, but I'm afraid it's going to continue. Therefore, China must prepare itself that this is not a temporary development. About the question of the Soviet Union, I think the difference is the following. The United States, in attacking the Soviet Union, first disorganized Soviet politics, or more correctly, it took advantage of the fact that an idiot, Gorbachev, became the leader of the Soviet Union. Therefore, this enabled the United States to disorganize the political system in the Soviet Union, to overthrow socialism in the Soviet Union, and then to destroy Russia's economy. So we may say in the confrontation with the Soviet Union, the order was deal with politics first, and then deal with the economy later. That was the US tactics. If you take the situation with China, the United States does not think that that's possible. I mean, they write it quite openly. They say Xi Jinping is not a Chinese Gorbachev. Therefore, we cannot have politics first and the economy second. First, we will have to have the economy first. The aim is to put sufficient economic pressure on China that the Chinese, and then hope that the Chinese Communist Party will then make mistakes. If under the pressure of these mistakes, the Chinese Communist Party makes mistakes, well then of course we can begin to deal with politics. Right, so therefore the order is the reverse. The aggression against China is starting with the economy, and second will come the question of politics. So therefore, I think that in one sense, if you mean by Cold War, is will there be increased US aggression? I think the answer is yes. Will it have the same tactics as the Cold War? No, I don't think so, for the reasons I've given it, because it faces different tactical situation with China.